I want to start by saying I was good at the job. I need that on the record. Even if the record is just me talking into a phone in my car in a parking lot, 2 states away from where any of this happened. I was a good CNA. I showed up. I answered lights. I turned people every 2 hours so they didn't get sores. I emptied catheter bags without making faces. I held hands that nobody else had time to hold. I'm telling you that because what comes after is going to make you wonder about me. And I'd rather you wonder about something true than something you made up. Harnett Valley Regional sits about 40 minutes off the interstate, past the outlet mall, and the 2 gas stations that hate each other, in a town that used to make furniture and now mostly makes nothing. It's a real hospital. It's still open. People are born there this week. People are dying there tonight while I talk. I worked nights on the 6th floor, med-surg overflow, and step down. The floor everybody calls 6 South, even though there isn't a 6 North anymore, because they closed it during the budget thing in the spring. 6 South is a long L-shaped hallway with 32 beds, fluorescent lights that hum in a key that gets into your teeth, and a nurse's station shaped like a kidney bean where the unit clerk sits behind a counter that's too high for anyone to see her face. I took the job because I needed it. That's not a tragic backstory, it's just arithmetic. I had a kid in daycare and a car that needed a transmission and a lease that went up every January, like the landlord set a reminder on his phone. Nights paid a shift differential. Nights meant I could be home in the afternoons. Nights, everybody told me, were slower. You round, you chart, you answer the occasional light. And between 2 and 5 in the morning, the floor goes so quiet, you can hear the ice machine drop a load down at the end of the hall and think it's a body falling. The first 3 weeks were nothing. I want you to understand how normal it was, because that's the part that scares me now, looking back. It was so normal. I learned the floor. I learned which beds had alarms that went off if a patient so much as rolled over, and which call lights were broken and lit up green at the station for no reason. I learned the rhythm of a shift change report, the way the day nurse hands you the floor like she's handing you a baby she's relieved to put down. Bed 610, total care, NPO after midnight. Bed 617, confused sundowner, keeps trying to climb out. Bed 624, comfort care, family's been notified, probably won't make the night. You write it all on a folded paper towel because the official handoff sheet is in the computer and the computer is slow. And you go, the first time I noticed something, I didn't notice anything. And that's the honest way to put it. It was a Tuesday into Wednesday, my 4th week, and it was around 3 in the morning. I was coming back from the supply room with an armful of blue Chucks pads, and I passed room 612, and the door was closed, and I heard Eddie talking inside. Eddie was the charge nurse. Big guy, mid-50s, hands like a catcher's mitt. The kind of nurse who's been doing it so long he can start an IV on a dehydrated 90-year-old in the dark on the first stick. He'd worked nights at Harnett Valley for 19 years. Everybody on the floor deferred to Eddie, even the doctors, in the quiet way you defer to someone who has seen more dead people than you ever will. I liked Eddie. I want that clear too. So I heard Eddie's voice through the door of 612, low and even. The way you talk to someone who's scared. There you go, he was saying. There you go, that's better. You're all set. Somebody'll be by. Normal, reassuring. The kind of thing I said 40 times a night. I didn't even slow down. I went and stocked my cart. It was only later, around 5, when I was helping the unit clerk reconcile the board for the morning, that I saw 612 was empty. Not empty like a patient was off getting a scan. Empty like discharged. The clerk, her name was Lorette. She'd been on that desk longer than Eddie had been on the floor, had it marked vacant and clean. Discharged at 1840 the evening before, almost 9 hours earlier. Gone before I even clocked in. I figured I'd misheard the room. The floor echoes. 12 and 10 and 14 all run together when you're tired. I told myself Eddie was in 610 or 614. Talking to somebody real, and I'd just gotten turned around. That's the thing about the beginning. There was always a better explanation, and I always took it. Because the better explanation let me keep working, and I needed to keep working. I have to tell you about the geography of a night shift, or none of this will land. During the day, that hospital is a machine. Phones ringing, families in the hall, the chaplain, the dietary cart, the doctors rounding in their little flocks, the discharge planners with their clipboards, moving people out as fast as the beds can be filled. There's noise the way a city has noise, constant, layered, meaningless. You stop hearing it, but day shift ends, and the visitors get herded out around 8:30, and the lights in the patient room start clicking off one by one, and by 11 the whole floor is changed temperature. The overheads in the hallway stay on, that flat blue-white that makes everybody look already dead, but the rooms go dark, and the only sounds are the machines. Telemetry monitors beeping in their soft 3-note way. IV pumps chirping when a bag runs dry. The compression sleeves on people's legs sighing and inflating. A bed alarm somewhere going off because somebody's foot touched the floor. And under all of it, if you stand still at the nurse's station at 3 a.m, there's a kind of hush that isn't really silence. It's the sound of a building full of people who are all asleep or all unconscious or all somewhere in between, breathing in 100 different rooms at once. You get used to it. You have to. But it took me about a month to realize that some of that breathing was coming from rooms that the computer said had nobody in them. The second time, I couldn't tell myself I misheard. It was a slow night, a Sunday, the kind where you've got maybe 20 of your 32 beds filled and half of those are stable enough to sleep through anything. Around 2, the call light for 612 lit up at the station. Green light, the soft electronic bing that the system makes. And on the little screen above Lorette's desk it said, Bed 612, in clean, digital letters. I looked at the board. 612 was still marked vacant, still clean, still discharged, now from a different patient. They'd had somebody in there for a day and a half and sent them home Saturday afternoon. The room had been turned over, cleaned, locked, nobody in it. I said out loud, 612's calling and it's empty. Lorette didn't look up from her crossword. She has a voice like a cigarette that learned to talk. She said, Eddie'll get it. And Eddie got up from where he was charting, and he didn't even sigh, which is what got me, because Eddie sighed at everything. Eddie sighed when the printer jammed, and he just stood up like the light was the most ordinary thing in the world, and he said, I got it, hon. You finish your meds. And he walked down the hall, and he went into 612, and the green light went off. I stood there with a blood pressure cuff in my hand. I watched the door. He was in there maybe 90 seconds. When he came out, he had an empty plastic water cup in his hand, the kind with the bendy straw and the kind we give everybody. He dropped it in the trash at the station and went back to his charting. I said, was somebody in there? Eddie looked at me. He had a way of looking at you over the top of his glasses that made you feel like you'd asked something rude at a funeral. He said, "Room needed checking? It's checked." And then, softer, not unkind, "You're new, so let me give you one. On nights, you don't have to understand every light. You just have to answer it. The understanding comes later or it doesn't come at all, and either way you sleep better not chasing it." I wrote it off as old-timer wisdom. Nights make people superstitious. I knew a guy at my last hospital who wouldn't say a patient was doing great because he was sure it jinxed them onto a code. Everybody's got a thing. I figured the empty room was Eddie's thing, a habit, a ritual he did to feel like the floor was buttoned up before the long stretch toward dawn. I figured the water cup was already in his pocket, that he'd grabbed it on the way. There's always a better explanation. But I started watching after that quietly. The way you watch a coworker you've decided is a little off, but harmless. Here's what I noticed over the next few weeks when I let myself. There were certain rooms the night staff treated differently, not haunted house differently, procedurally differently. 612 was one, 619 was another, the one at the far corner of the L where the hallway turns, and 627 down by the soiled utility room. These rooms got cleaned and turned over and marked vacant just like any other. But at night, somebody always answered when their lights came on, and the lights came on more than empty rooms have any business doing. And the staff had language for it. They never said anything strange out loud. They never said the ghost in 612. They said practical things, the kind of things that sound completely normal until you notice nobody ever explains them. Don't clear 612 yet. Leave it open in the system till day shift. If 619 lights up, take water, just water. Whatever you do, don't bring a wheelchair to 627. They'll think they're going somewhere. That last one came from a nurse named Carmen, who'd been on the floor about 2 years. Long enough to know the rules, and not long enough to stop being bothered by them. Carmen was younger than me, sharp. The kind of nurse who double checks everything because she's still scared of making the mistake that ends a career. She was the one who explained the wheelchair thing, and she said it fast and flat, the way you tell someone where the fire extinguisher is, and then she changed the subject so hard I got whiplash. I said, "Why not a wheelchair?" And Carmen, who I would have called the most rational person on that floor, looked down the hall towards 627 and said, "Because then you have to take them somewhere. And there isn't anywhere to take them, and they know that, so you don't offer." And then she laughed, a short, ugly laugh that had nothing funny in it, and said, "God, listen to me. I need to sleep. Forget it." I didn't forget it. I need to tell you about the EHR, because the computer is where I first caught the floor in a lie. And once you catch a hospital in a lie, you can't go back to trusting it. Our charting system was the same one half the hospitals in the country use. You log in with a badge and a password, you pull up the floor, you see a grid of rooms and patients color-coded with little icons for fall risk and isolation and code status. When a patient gets discharged, a nurse clicks through a checklist, the discharge gets signed, the orders get discontinued, the bed flips to dirty, housekeeping gets a ping, they clean it, somebody marks it clean, and it goes back in the pool. It's a clean little loop, status in, status out. The computer always knows where everybody is. That's the whole point of the computer. Except 612 wouldn't close. I watched Lorette try to clear it one night around 4. The patient who'd been in there, a real one, a hip replacement named, I think, Mr. Abernathy, sweet old guy. Went home with his daughter. Had been discharged at 6 the evening before. The bed had been cleaned. But in the system, his chart was still open. Not the discharge, the chart. Like he was still admitted. Like he was still lying in 612 with his hip and his crossword and his daughter on her way. Lorette clicked the discharge button. The system spun. It came back with an error. Patient status cannot be updated. Active orders pending. She frowned, pulled up his orders. There weren't any. Everything was discontinued. She tried again. Same error. She muttered something, called the help desk, sat on hold, hung up. Then she did something I didn't understand at the time. She stopped trying. She left the chart open, typed a note into the shift comms, 612 won't close in system, leave for days, and went back to her crossword like she'd done it 100 times. Which, I'd come to learn, she had. I asked her about it later when Eddie was down the hall and Carmen was in a room. I leaned on the high counter and I said, "Why won't 612 close?" Lorette put her pen down. She's got these reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she took them off, which she only did when she was about to tell you something she meant. She said, "Some rooms don't like to let go. They hold the chart open. You can't force it. You force it, and the next light that comes from that room comes louder, and somebody has to answer it louder. And that's how people get hurt." She put her glasses back on. "Leave it open. Day shift will close it. Day shift can close anything. They got the light on their side." I said, "What does that mean, the light?" She said, "Sun's up. Different rules." And that was it. That was all I got. I went home that morning and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive. Not because I was scared, because I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and because some part of me had started keeping a tally, and the tally was getting too long to ignore. Things I had on the list by then, 2 months in. A room that wouldn't close in the computer no matter who tried. A call light from that room that came on after the room was cleaned and locked. A water cup that came back half empty from a room with no patient. A charge nurse who answered those lights without question, and a unit clerk who treated the impossible like a known printer error. A bedside whiteboard, and this is the one that got under my skin, that updated itself. The whiteboard. Every room has one. A dry erase board on the wall the patient can see from the bed with the date and the nurse's name and the CNA's name and the day's goals and the pain scale faces and a little box that says "Call, don't fall." Housekeeping wipes them clean at turnover. I watched a housekeeper named Sandoval wipe 612's board clean one night around midnight. Completely blank. I saw it with my own eyes through the door he left open. At 4 a.m, I walked past 612, and the door was open again. It shouldn't have been. It had been closed, and the room was vacant, and the whiteboard had writing on it. Today's date. A nurse name. Eddie. A CNA name. And in the goals box in handwriting I didn't recognize, it had said, "Going home today." I stood in the doorway. The room was empty. Stripped bed, no linens. The mattress in its blue plastic cover. The IV pole standing in the corner like a coat rack. The kind of empty that has a smell, that pink industrial cleaner in the cold. And the board said, "Going home today," in someone's careful, hopeful handwriting. The kind of thing a hopeful patient writes about themselves, or a nurse writes to give a scared person something to hold on to. I didn't touch it. I want you to know I didn't touch it. I went and found Eddie and I said, 612's board has writing on it, the goals box. Eddie didn't ask what it said. That's what I keep coming back to. He didn't ask what it said. He just nodded slow and said, "Okay, leave it. Don't erase it." And then he looked at me with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite kindness. And he said, "You're seeing it now. I figured you would. You pay attention. That's why I let you on my floor. So I'm going to tell you the one rule, and then I'm not going to talk about it again because talking about it makes it worse. You understand? Talking about it is how it learns your name." I said, "Okay." My mouth was dry. He said, "If a room calls and it's supposed to be empty, you answer it. You go in, you're calm, you're kind. You do the small thing, water, a blanket, the light off. And then you leave. You do not tell them they've been discharged. You do not tell them they died. You do not offer to take them anywhere. You do not agree when they say they're ready to go home. You just give them the small thing and you tell them somebody will be by, and you leave the chart open and you let day shift sort the paperwork. That's it. That's the whole job after midnight. You're not curing anybody. You're just not leaving them alone." I said, "Eddie, who's in those rooms?" And he said the thing I still hear when I can't sleep. He said, "Nobody's in those rooms. That's the problem. They're not in the rooms. They're not anywhere. The hospital's still got their chart open. And as long as the chart's open, they're still ours. And you don't leave what's yours alone in the dark. Now, that's not a hospital rule. That's just a person rule. You answer the light because somebody has to. And the somebody is you. I'd like to tell you I quit then. I didn't quit. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was the money, same as always. But part of it, and this is the part I didn't understand until much later, was that what Eddie said made a horrible kind of sense to me because of my mother. My mother died in a hospital 3 years before any of this. Not Harnett Valley. A bigger one in the city, a good one. The kind with a fountain in the lobby. She was in for what was supposed to be routine, and it turned into not routine, the way it does. And on her last night, I was the only family there. And I fell asleep in the chair, and somewhere in the small hours, she pressed her call light. I know she pressed it because the next morning a nurse mentioned, not meaning anything by it, that the light had been on for a while, overnight, and they'd been slammed with a code down the hall. My mother pressed her call light in the dark, and nobody came. And I was asleep 4 feet away. And by the time anybody came, she was past needing anything. I have never told anyone that. I'm telling you now because you need to understand that when Eddie said you don't leave what's yours alone in the dark, you answer the light because somebody has to. It didn't sound like horror to me. It sounded like the thing I would have given anything to have been true that night. So I stayed. God help me. I stayed because the rule was the rule I'd wished somebody had followed for my mom. It got worse slowly, the way everything real gets worse. Not a jump scare, a drift. There was a night a bed alarm went off in 619, and 619 didn't have a bed in it. They'd pulled the bed for repairs, a busted side rail, and the room was completely empty, no furniture, just the floor and the window and the dark. And the bed alarm went off. That specific shrieking 3-tone bed alarm, the one that means somebody's trying to get up who shouldn't be. From a room with no bed, I heard it. Carmen heard it. We looked at each other across the station, and Carmen's face did something I'd never seen it do. She said very quietly, "I'll take it." And she went and she came back, and the alarm stopped, and she didn't tell me what she did, and I didn't ask. Because by then I was learning that asking was how you ended up the one who had to answer. There was a night the security guard, a heavy-set older man named Gilbert, who did rounds with a flashlight board and an attitude of profound disinterest, refused to walk the far end of the L. He'd do the rest of the floor every room, jiggle every door. But when he got to the corner where 619 turns into 627, he'd stop, sign his sheet, and turn around. I asked him once in the break room why he didn't finish the hall. Gilbert was not a superstitious man. Gilbert thought the nurses were all a little crazy and said so. But he put down his sandwich and he said, 22 years I've been doing security in this county. Schools, the courthouse, here. I'll walk anywhere. I walked through the old jail when they found the body in the wall. I don't walk that corner after midnight because one time I walked it and a voice from 627 said goodnight to me by name, and the room was empty, and I'd never told anybody my name on this floor. He picked his sandwich back up. I get paid to keep people safe. Can't keep myself safe down there. So I don't go. There was a night the respiratory tech, a quiet guy named Marcus, who covered 3 floors and only came up to 6 South when somebody disadded, told me he hated our floor. I asked why. He said, because I can hear them breathing in the empty ones. He had this little machine, this capnography thing, and he said one time he'd wheeled it past 612 and it picked up a respiratory rate, end title CO2, a waveform, from an empty room. Machines don't get scared, he said. Machines don't have an imagination. The machine saw somebody breathing in there. I didn't put much stock in what I hear anymore. I put stock in what the machine sees, and the machine saw it too. The thing nobody tells you about working around something you can't explain is that you start to keep 2 sets of books. There's the official version, the one in the computer, the one you tell day shift, the one you'd say out loud if a manager asked. And there's the real version, the one that lives in the back of your skull. It never gets written down, and the gap between the two becomes the place you actually live. In the official version, Harnett Valley Regional was an understaffed but functioning hospital where a few rooms had glitchy call light wiring that facilities kept saying they'd fix. In the real version, there were rooms where people who had left the building were still being cared for quietly by a night crew who'd figured out that the caring was the only thing keeping the situation from getting worse, and who had agreed, without ever holding a meeting about it, to never say so. I started to understand the pattern through the discharges. That's what I want you to sit with, because this is the part that isn't about ghosts. It's about a system. When a patient leaves a hospital, there's a difference between leaving and being released. And I never thought about it before that floor. You can be discharged in the computer. A nurse clicks the button, the chart closes, you're statistically gone, the bed counts as available, the metrics update, you can be physically gone. Your daughter wheeled you down to the front circle and loaded you in the Buick and drove you home. You can be released from the hospital's responsibility, the legal billing, liability since the hospital is done. You're not their problem. And then there's the 4th thing, the one the system doesn't have a button for, the one nobody charts. Actually gone. Done. Finished being a patient in the deepest sense. Released not from the hospital, but from the in-between. And what I came to believe on that floor in those hours is that those 4 things are supposed to happen at roughly the same time. And at Harnett Valley, they sometimes didn't. Sometimes a person got discharged in the computer and driven home in the Buick and released from billing, and the 4th thing didn't take. The chart wouldn't close. The room called. The whiteboard updated. And the building kept treating them as present because in the way that mattered, the way the system couldn't see, they hadn't finished leaving. The ones who scared me weren't the ones who'd been transferred or sent home. Those were rare and gentle and usually closed out on their own after a night or two, like the building was just slow to update. The ones who scared me were the ones who died, because the hospital has a clean process for that too. There's a pronouncement, a time of death. The body goes to the morgue. The chart gets closed in a specific way. The room gets a deep clean. It's supposed to be the most final of all the closings, and mostly it is. But 3 times in my months on that floor, a patient who had died during the day shift kept their room open at night. Their call light came on, their chart wouldn't close, and somebody answered. The worst one I'll tell you straight through because it's the one that made me into whatever I am now. There was a woman in 624. I'm not going to use her real name. I never will. And she was on comfort care, end stage, the kind of admission where everybody on the floor already knows how it ends, and the only question is the timing. She was tiny and clear-minded and funny, the funniest dying person I ever met. And she had a daughter who drove 90 miles each way and a son who didn't come. And on my nights, I'd sit with her when I had a minute because she couldn't sleep and neither could I. She told me about the furniture factory where she'd worked the line for 30 years, and she told me she wasn't scared. She was just tired, and tired she could handle. She'd been tired her whole life. She died on a Thursday afternoon, day shift. I wasn't there. I found out at handoff the day nurse handed me the floor and said, with the gentleness they save for the ones they liked, that 624 had passed around too. Daughter made it in time. It was peaceful. The room was already turned over, deep cleaned, marked vacant. The chart, the day nurse said, was closed. She'd checked it herself. At 2:40 that morning, the call light for 624 came on. I was standing at the station. Lorette was on. Eddie was off that night. It was his weekend, and the charge was a float nurse who didn't know the floor and was already drowning, and Carmen was tied up in a real room with a real patient who was crashing. So it was me. The light said bed 624, and it sang its little electronic note, and the screen glowed green, and the floor was as quiet as it ever got, and there was nobody to answer it but me. I want to tell you I was brave. I wasn't. I stood there, and I shook. Because I knew that room was empty. I knew it more certainly than I'd known anything on that floor. Because I'd watched them wheel her body down with my own knowledge of who she was. Because I'd sat with her 2 nights before and held the hand that was now in the morgue. And the light was on. And I knew who was calling. Lorette didn't tell me to answer it. That's the thing. By then she didn't have to. She just looked at me over her glasses, and there was something almost like sympathy in it. And she said, "You knew her. You don't have to. I'll find somebody." And that the permission to not is the exact thing that made me go. Because I thought about my mother's light burning in the dark while I slept 4 feet away. And I thought somebody has to, and the somebody is me. I filled a cup of water with the bendy straw. I don't know why. It's what you do. And I walked down the long fluorescent hallway, past the dark rooms with their breathing, to 624. And the door was closed, and I opened it. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. The bed was stripped and sealed in its blue plastic. The window showed the parking lot and the one sodium light in the dark beyond it. The whiteboard was blank. The room smelled like cleaner and cold. And from the direction of the bed, in the dark, in a voice I knew, a voice that had told me about the furniture factory, she said, "Oh, good, I was hoping it'd be you." I'm not going to dress this up. I'm not going to make it poetic. There was nothing there. The bed was empty. I could see the bed. And she talked to me from it, tired and warm and a little amused, the way she always had. And she said her feet were cold and would I mind? and I put the cup of water on the bedside tray with my hands shaking so bad the water jumped. And I found a blanket in the warmer down the hall, and I came back, and I laid it over the empty bed, over the flat blue plastic. And I tucked it the way you tuck someone, around where the feet would be, and she sighed, this long, contented sigh, and said, "That was better. That was so much better. Thank you, honey." And then she said, "Am I going home soon?" And I remembered Eddie's rule. Don't tell them they've been discharged. Don't tell them they died. Don't agree when they say they're ready to go home. So I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said the thing he taught me, the only safe thing. And it came out of me in a whisper because it was all I had. Somebody'll be by. And from the empty bed, under the warm blanket I'd tucked around, "Nothing," she said. "Okay, I'll wait. I'm good at waiting." And the call light went off. I left the cup. I left the blanket. I left the chart open. I walked back to the station, and Lorette didn't ask, and I didn't tell, and I went into the med room. And I sat on the floor between the Pyxis and the wall, and I cried so quietly that nobody heard. Because the one thing you learn on nights is how to fall apart without making a sound. After that night, I stopped fighting it. I'd like to say I made a decision, but it wasn't a decision, it was an exhaustion. I just started doing what Eddie and Lorette and Carmen did. I answered the lights from the empty rooms. I brought the water. I tucked the blankets around the places where feet would be. I turned off the lights they wanted off. I said somebody'll be by, and I left. And I let day shift close what they could close. I became part of the unofficial thing, and the unofficial thing was, I realized, the only mercy in the building after midnight. Because the alternative, leaving them, ignoring the lights, letting the calls go unanswered in the dark, was the thing that none of us could live with, and the thing I slowly understood that made it worse. Because that was the part Eddie never fully said, but I figured out on my own. The lights that got answered settled. The room would call for a night or two, 3 at most, and you'd answer, and you'd bring the small thing, and then one morning the chart would finally close, and the room would go quiet, and stay quiet, and the person would be, in the fourth and final sense, gone, released. The caring finished the leaving that the paperwork couldn't, but the lights that didn't get answered got louder. There was a story on the floor, told in fragments, about a winter a few years before mine, when they'd been so short-staffed for so long that some of the empty room lights just went unanswered for weeks, and the floor, they said, got bad. Bed alarms in every empty room at once. Whiteboards rewriting themselves with names of people who'd died years apart. A patient, a living one, a real one, who they found one morning standing in the doorway of 627 in his gown, who said a woman in the room had asked him to help her get her things together because she was going home, and who never quite came back right after, who they had to transfer to psych, who, the story went, kept asking the staff there if they'd remembered to answer 627. That was why the rules existed. Not superstition, containment. You answer the lights, gently, one at a time, all night, every night, because if you stop, the in-between stops being patient, and it starts reaching for the people who are still all the way here. There were other nights between the woman in 624 and the night that ended it for me. And I want to put a few of them down. Not because they're the worst, but because they're the ones that taught me how the thing actually worked. The mechanics of it, the way you learn the mechanics of any job by doing it badly until you do it right. There was the night the phone rang at the station around 3, and Lorette answered it and went quiet in a way that made me look up. It was a family member, a son. His mother had been discharged that afternoon from 617. A real discharge. Signed and clean. Picked up by a medical transport van to go to a rehab facility across the county. Standard. Happens 20 times a day. Except the son was calling because the rehab facility said she'd never arrived, and the transport company said they dropped her at home per the updated order. And the home health aide said the house was empty and nobody could find her. And the last place anybody could confirm she'd actually been was 617 that afternoon in that bed. Lorette took down the information in her careful hand. She said, "The things you say will check our records. Someone will call you back. Try not to worry." And when she hung up, she didn't call anybody. She pulled up 617 in the system. The chart was still open. It hadn't closed. The discharge had gone through. The orders were discontinued. The van had signed for her. And the chart was still, somehow, open. Lorette looked at it for a long time. Then she typed a note. 617 holding, do not reassign. And she got up and she filled a cup of water. And she walked down to 617, which was supposed to be empty, which the whole county was at that moment trying to figure out how to fill with a search party. And she went in and she stayed a few minutes and she came out and she said to me quietly, "She's not lost. She just hasn't finished leaving. She'll turn up. They always turn up. The trick is you don't make a fuss, because the fuss is what scares them. And a scared one is the kind that doesn't come back at all. I never found out if that woman turned up. I didn't want to know. Some part of me is still afraid to look her name up. There was the night I found the wristband. We bag our trash in the soiled utility room, big rolling bins, and one of my jobs near the end of shift was to tie off the bags and stage them for environmental services. I was tying off a bag from the far end of the L, and something light caught on the drawstring, and it was a patient ID band. The plastic kind, printed with a name and a date of birth and a medical record number and a little barcode. From a room that, according to every record we had not had a patient in it that night. An empty room, a clean room. And that empty clean room was a wristband, cut the way you cut a wristband off a patient who's being discharged. That clean diagonal snip. I held it under the light. The name on it was a name I didn't recognize. The date of birth made the person 91. I almost scanned the barcode. We had handheld scanners. It would have pulled up the chart, and Carmen, who'd come in behind me for linens, put her hand on my wrist, not hard, just firm, and said, "Don't scan it. If you scan it, it knows you found it. And then it's yours to close out. And you do not want to be the one closing that out at 4 a.m. She took it from me gently, and she dropped it back in the bag, and she tied the bag, and she said, "Day shift bags get scanned in daylight. That's a day problem. Let it be a day problem." I think about that wristband more than almost anything. A real name, a real birthday, a real person, 91 years old, somewhere in the records of that hospital, and a band cut off them in a room where they'd never been, on a night they weren't there. I never looked up the name. I'm proud of that and ashamed of it in equal measure. And there was the night that taught me the difference between the kinds. Because not all of the open rooms were the dead. There was a patient who got moved to the ICU one evening, a real transfer, a man whose pressures dropped and who needed more than our floor could give. And they wheeled him out, bed and all, down to the unit in his room, 610. Got turned over for somebody new. But that night, his light came on too. And when I told Eddie did something different. He pulled up the ICU census on the computer. and he confirmed the man was down there, alive, intubated, holding on. And then Eddie didn't go answer the light. He let it ring. He said, "That one's still in the building, still got a body, still got a fighting chance. He doesn't need us. The we answer are the ones who've got nowhere else they're being held. He's being held downstairs in a bed by machines and people who can actually do something. Our rooms are for the ones who aren't being held anywhere anymore. You answer those, because if you don't, nobody else even knows to." The man in the ICU lived, by the way, walked out a week later. His light in 610 went quiet the moment they got him stable downstairs. That's how I knew Eddie was telling the truth about the difference. The living have somewhere to be held. It's the ones who are caught between the chart and the dark that have only us. There was Priya too, the newest nurse, newer than Carmen, who came on about 2 months before I left. She noticed things fast, the way the attentive ones do, and she was scared, the way the attentive ones are, and she did the thing I'd done. She came to me, because I was no longer the newest, and she said, 612 called, and the board says it's empty. What do I do? And I heard myself become Eddie. I heard myself say the rule. Answer the light. Bring the water. Be kind. Don't tell them they've been discharged. Don't tell them anything they've left. Don't agree when they say they're ready to go home. Say somebody'll be by. Leave the chart open. And I watched her face do the thing my face had done, the not wanting to understand. And I watched her decide to stay anyway, for whatever her own reasons were. The money or the family or the wish that somebody would answer a light for someone she'd lost. And I felt sick, because I knew I just made one more. The floor doesn't recruit you with fear. It recruits you with the one thing decent people can't refuse, which is the chance to not leave someone alone in the dark. My night came in the spring. The thing I'd been dreading without knowing I was dreading it. There was a man, a real patient, alive, in 612. Yes, 612 of all the rooms. The one that never closed right. He was a heart failure, a frequent flyer, the kind of guy the whole floor knew by first name because he came in every couple months when he ate too much salt and his lungs filled up. Sweet, ornery, lonely. His wife had died the year before. He'd been on the floor 4 days, getting better, getting dried out, scheduled to go home in the morning. A clean discharge, the good kind, the kind where everybody's glad. He told me that night when I brought his evening meds that he was looking forward to his own bed and his own coffee and his cat, who his neighbor was watching. He was in good spirits. He was going home. He coded at 3:15 in the morning. It was fast and it was ugly, and we ran it the way you run a code, the whole machinery of it, the compressions and the meds and the cart and the calling out, and it didn't work. And the doctor on call pronounced him at 3:51, and the room emptied out. The way a code room empties out, everybody suddenly with somewhere else to be. And I was one of the ones who stayed to clean up, to bag the lines and strip the bed. And I was in 612, alone at 4:10 in the morning, and the call light came on. The call light in the room I was standing in. While I was standing in it, the empty bed I had just stripped behind me, and the light went on. And his voice, the man who'd been pronounced 19 minutes before. The man whose body was still warm and still in the building. In the room with me, his voice from the bed I'd just stripped said, Hey, can you help me out? I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to go home now. Can you take me home? And here was the moral dilemma, the real one. The one the rules had been preparing me for the whole time without my consent. Because Eddie's rule was, don't agree when they say they're ready to go home. Don't offer to take them anywhere. Don't bring a wheelchair. You bring water. You bring a blanket. You say somebody'll be by. And you leave them in the in-between, patient, contained, until the chart closes on its own and they finish leaving the safe way, the slow way, the way that doesn't reach out and pull anyone with it. But this was a man who had been going home in the morning, who had a cat and a neighbor and his own coffee, who had been 4 days running the easiest, gladdest discharge on the floor. And he was asking me clearly in his own ornery, lonely voice to take him home. And I knew that if I followed the rule, if I gave him water and a blanket and said somebody'll be by, he would wait. He was a patient man. He'd told me so. He would wait in 612, the room that never closed, and he would become one of the voices, one of the lights, one of the rooms the new CNAs would learn never to clear. He'd wait forever in the in-between, contained, harmless, alone in the dark, being tended to and never released. Because that was the safe thing. Because the safe thing was to never let them finish. Or I could break the rule. I could answer the way he was actually asking to be answered. I could do the thing Eddie said never to do. I could agree. I could tell him yes. Yes, you're ready. It's time. You can go home now. I could get the wheelchair. I could offer to take him somewhere. And I didn't know what that would do. Maybe it would release him. Maybe agreeing was the one thing that let the in-between let go. The permission the system couldn't give. Or maybe it would do what the rules existed to prevent. Maybe agreeing was how the thing in the empty rooms learned it could leave with you. Maybe I'd be the patient they found in psych, asking if anyone remembered to answer the light. I stood in 612 with my hands full of his IV lines, and I had to decide, alone, at 4:10 in the morning with nobody to ask, what I owed a dead man who wanted to go home and a hospital full of living people who needed the dead to stay where they were put. I'm not going to tell you which one I chose. I've thought about whether to, and I'm not going to. And not because I'm being coy. It's because I genuinely don't know if I did the right thing. And if I tell you what I did, you'll decide. And I can't have you deciding. Because then I'd have to live with your verdict on top of my own, and I don't have the room. I'll tell you that I left Harnett Valley 3 weeks later. I'll tell you I transferred different city, different hospital, days this time, a med-surg floor where the sun comes through the windows and the discharges close on the first click and stay closed, and no room has ever called when it was empty because I check constantly. I am the most checking nurse anyone has ever worked with. I'll tell you I have a kid who's older now, and a car that finally died the honest way, and a lease I got out of. I left it all behind. The floor, the rules, the in-between, I left. That's what I tell myself. Here's why I'm sitting in a parking lot talking into my phone instead of sleeping. 2 nights ago, I picked up an extra shift on a different unit at my new hospital, covering for a friend, a unit I don't normally work, and around 2 in the morning, a call light came on for a room down the hall, and the charge nurse, a woman my age, kind, competent, somebody I'd trust with my own kid, got up before I could, and she said, "The way you say the most ordinary thing in the world, I'll get it, that one's tricky. Don't clear it in the system, leave it for days." And she walked down the hall, and she went into a room I was fairly sure was empty, and I heard her, through the door, low and even and kind, saying, there you go, that's better. Somebody'll be by." And I realized 2 things at once standing there, and I haven't slept since. The first is that it's not just Harnett Valley. It was never just Harnett Valley. It's every hospital that's ever been short a person at 4 in the morning. There's a night crew in every building doing the quiet thing, answering the lights from the empty rooms, keeping the in-between patient and contained and tended, never saying so, never writing it down. And I just never had eyes to see it until I worked one floor long enough that the floor decided to show me. They're everywhere. They're under all of us all night, holding the line so the rest of you can sleep. The second thing is worse. And it's why I had to stop driving and call somebody and anybody, even just my own phone, even just you, whoever's hearing this. When I clocked out that night, I badged through the time clock the way you do. And I happened to glance at the little screen, the one that shows your name and your assignment. And under my name on a unit I had worked exactly one shift on in a hospital I transferred to, specifically because it was nowhere near Harnett Valley. The screen showed my next assignment. A room I'd never been assigned. A room I'm not scheduled for. A room I'd have sworn when I walked past it was empty. It said my name, and it said the room. And in the little status box where it tells you the patient's condition, it didn't say anything a computer is supposed to be able to say. It said, waiting, good at waiting. I'm not going back in for that shift. I want that clear. I called out. I'm not going. But the thing about the in-between, the thing I learned on 6 South and can't unlearn, is that it doesn't need you to come in. It just needs you to have answered one time, one light you weren't supposed to answer in a room that was supposed to be empty. After that, you're on the assignment. After that, the chart stays open. After that, you're theirs, and they don't leave what's theirs alone in the dark. So somebody will be by. For me. Eventually. And when they come, I hope to God they're kind. And I hope they bring water. And I hope they don't tell me I've been discharged. And I hope when I ask if I'm going home soon, they have the decency to do what I did for that woman in 624. What Eddie taught me. The only merciful thing there is to say in a room that doesn't close. I hope they just say somebody'll be by. And I hope, unlike me, I'm good at waiting. I used to think I would be. I told a dying woman once that I was good at it. I'm starting to find out that I'm not.